This is Chapter 5, The Garden of Eden. Man loses his dream body and gains a soul. Jane Roberts' book, Dreams, Evolution, and Value Fulfillment, Volume 1, a Seth book. The Garden of Eden legend represents a distorted version of man's awakening as a physical creature. He becomes fully operational in his physical body, and while awake, he can only sense the dream body that had earlier been so real to him. He now encounters his experience from within a body that must be fed, clothed, protected from the elements, a body that is subject to gravity and to gravity's laws. He must use physical muscles to walk from place to place. He sees himself suddenly, in a leap of comprehension, as existing for the first time not only apart from the environment, but apart from all of Earth's creatures. The sense of separation is, in those terms, initially almost shattering. Yet man is to be the portion of nature that views itself with perspective. He is to be the part of nature that will specialize again in the self-conscious use of concepts. He will grow the flower of the intellect, a flower that must have its deep roots buried securely within the earth, and yet a flower that will send its new psychic seeds outward, not only for itself, but for the rest of nature of which it is a part. But man looked out and felt himself suddenly separate and amazed at the aloneness. Now he must find food where before his dream body did not need physical nourishment. Before, man had been neither male nor female, combining the characteristics of each. But now the physical bodies also specialized in terms of sexuality. Man has to physically procreate. Some lost ancient legends emphasized in a clear fashion this sudden sexual division. By the time the biblical legend came into being, however, historical events and social beliefs were transformed into the Adam and Eve version of events. On the one hand, man did indeed feel that he had fallen from a high estate because he remembered that earlier freedom of dream reality, a reality in which the other creatures were still to some degree immersed. Man's mind, incidentally at that point, had all the abilities that you now assign to it, the great capacity for contrast of imagination and intellect, the drive for objectivity and for subjectivity, the full capacity for the development of language, a keen mind that was as brilliant in any caveman, say, as it is in any man on a modern street. But if man felt suddenly alone and isolated, he was immediately struck by the grand variety of the world and its creatures. Each creature apart from him was a new mystery. He was enchanted also by his own subjective reality, the body in which he found himself, and by the differences between himself and others like him, and the other creatures. He instantly began to explore, to categorize, to point out and to name the other creatures of the earth as they came to his attention. In a fashion, it was a great creative and yet cosmic game that consciousness played with itself, and it did represent a new kind of awareness. But I want to emphasize that each version of all that is unique. Each has its purpose, though that purpose cannot be easily defined in your terms. Many people ask, for example, what is the purpose of my life? Meaning, what am I meant to do? But the purpose of your life in each life is in its being. That being may include certain actions, but the acts themselves are only important in that they spring out of the essence of your life, which simply by being is bound to fulfill its purposes. Man's dream body is still with him, of course, but the physical body now obscures it. The dream body cannot be harmed while the physical one can, as man quickly found out, as he transformed his experience largely from one to the other. In the dream body, man feared nothing. The dream body does not die. It exists before and after physical death. In their dream bodies, men had watched the spectacle of animals killing other animals, and they saw the animals' dream bodies emerge unscathed. They saw that the earth was simply changing its form, but that the identity of each unit of consciousness survived. And so, although they saw the picture of death, they did not recognize it as the death that so many people now seems an inevitable end. Men saw that there must be an exchange of physical energy for the world to continue. They watched the drama of the hunter and the prey, seeing that each animal contributed so that the physical form of the earth could continue. But the rabbit eaten by the wolf survived in a dream body that men knew was its true form. When man awakened in his physical body, however, and specialized in the use of its senses, he no longer perceived the released dream body of the slain animal running away, still cavorting on the hillside. He retained memory of his earlier knowledge, and for a considerable period he could now and then recapture that knowledge. He became more and more aware of his physical senses, however. Some things were definitely pleasant and some were not. Some stimuli were to be sought out and others avoided, and so over a period of time he translated the pleasant and the unpleasant into rough versions of good and evil. Basically, what made him feel good was good. He was gifted with strong, clear instincts that were meant to lead him toward his own greatest development, to his own greatest fulfillment, in such a way that he also helped to bring about the highest potentials of all of the other species of consciousness. His natural impulses were meant to provide inner directives that would guide him in just such a direction, so that he sought what was the best for himself and for others. Now, topic the light. There is, as I have told you, an inner psychological universe from which your own emerges, and that inner universe is also the source of Framework 2 as well. It is responsible for all physical effects and is behind all physical laws. It is not just that such an inner universe is different from your own, but that any real or practical explanation of its reality would require the birth of an entirely new physics, and any such development would first of all necessitate the birth of an entirely new philosophy. The physics cannot come first, you see. It is not so much that such developments are beyond man's capacity as it is that they involve manipulations impossible to make for all practical purposes from his present standpoint. He could theoretically move to a better vantage point in the twinkling of an eye, relatively speaking, but for now we must largely use analogies. Those analogies may lead you or Rupert or a few others to a more advantageous vantage point, so that certain leaps become possible. But those leaps are not just leaps of intellect, but of will and intuition alike, fused and focused. The light of your questions is, in its way, an apport from that other inner universe. In your world, light has certain properties and limits. It is physically perceived by the eyes, and to a far lesser degree by the skin itself. In your world, light comes from the sun. It has been an exterior source, and in your world, light and dark certainly appear to be opposites. Rupert glimpsed some of the principles involved when you were at your downtown apartments on several occasions. Once, when he tried to write a poem about the comprehensions that simply would not be verbalized. I do not know how to explain some of this, but in your terms, there is light within darkness. Light has more manifestations than its physical version, so that even when it may not be physically manifested, there is light everywhere, and that light is the source of your physical version and its physical laws. In a manner of speaking, light itself forms darkness. Each unit of consciousness, whatever its degree, is again composed of energy, and that energy manifests itself within a kind of light that is not physically perceived, a light that is basically now far more intense than any physical variety, and a light from which all colors emerge. The colors of which you are aware represent a very small portion of light's entire spectrum, just physically speaking. But the spectrum you recognize represents only one inconceivably small portion of other fuller spectrums, spectrums that exist outside of physical laws. So-called empty spaces, either in your living room between objects or the seemingly empty spaces between the stars, are physical representations or misrepresentations, for all of space is filled with the units of consciousness, alive with a light from which the very fires of life are lit. The physical senses have to screen out such perceptions. That light, however, is literally everywhere at once, and it is a knowing light. Now, on certain occasions, sometimes near the point of death, but often simply in conscious states outside of the body, man is able to perceive that kind of light. In some out-of-body experiences, Rupert, for example, saw colors more dazzling than any physical ones, and you saw the same kind of colors in your dream. They are a part of your inner senses' larger spectrum of perception, and in the dream state you were not relying upon your physical senses at all. When I speak of an inner psychological universe, it is very difficult to explain what I mean. In that reality, however, psychological activity is not limited by any of the physical laws that you know. Thought, for example, has properties that you do not perceive. Properties that not only affect matter, but that form their own greater patterns outside of your reality. These follow their own, say, laws of physics. You add on to or build up your own reality in other dimensions throughout your physical life. The paintings that you have envisioned, for example, exist there, and they are every bit as real as the paintings in your studio. I am not symbolically speaking here. There is indeed light that you do not see, sound that you do not hear, sensations that you do not feel. All of these belong to the realm of the inner senses. The inner senses represent your true powers of perception. They represent, say, your native, non-physical perceptive equipment. The physical senses are relatively easy to distinguish. You know what you see from what you hear. If you close your eyes, you do not see. The inner senses, though I have in the past described them by separating their functions and characteristics, basically operate together in such a way that, in your terms, it would be highly difficult to separate one from the others. They function with a perfect spontaneous order, aware of all synchronicities. In that psychological universe, then, it is possible for entities to be everywhere at once, aware of everything at once. Your world is composed of such entities, the units of consciousness that form your body. The kinds of conscious minds that you have cannot hold that kind of information. These units of consciousness, however, add themselves up to form psychological beings far greater in number than, say, the number of stars in your galaxy. And each of these psychological formations has its own identity, its own soul, if you prefer, its own purpose in the entire fabric of being. We need some new carriers for the concepts, but the light itself represents that inner universe and the source of all comprehension. At the time of this awakening, man did experience then some sense of separation from his dream body and from his own inner reality, the world of his dreams. But he was still far more aware of that subjective existence than you are now. The practical nature of his own dreams was also more apparent, for again, his dreams sent him precise visions as to where food might be located, for example, and for some centuries there were human migrations of a kind that now you see the geese make. All of those journeys followed literal paths that were given as information in the dream state. But more and more man began to identify himself with his exterior environment. He began to think of his inner ego almost as if it were a stranger to himself. It became his version of the soul, and there seemed to be a duality, a self who acted in the physical universe, and a separate spirit-like soul that acted in an immaterial world. This early man and woman regarded this snake as the most sacred and basic, most secretive and most knowledgeable of all creatures. In that experience, it seemed surely that the snake was a living portion of the earth, rising from the bowels of the earth, rising from the hidden source of all earth gods. Men watched snakes emerge from their holes with wonder. This snake was then, in your terms now, both a feminine and a masculine symbol. It seemed to come from the womb of the earth, and to possess the earth's secret wisdom. Yet also, in its extended form particularly, it was the symbol for the penis. It was important also in that it shed its skin, as man innately knew he shed his own bodies. All units of consciousness, whatever their degree, possesses purpose and intent. They are endowed with the desire for creativity and to increase the quality of existence. They have the capacity to respond to multitudinous cues. There is a great elasticity for action and mobility, so that, for example, in man, his conscious experience can actually be put together in an almost limitless number of ways. The inner and outer egos do not have a cement-like relationship, but can interrelate with each other in almost infinite fashions, still preserving the reality of physical experience, but varying the accents put upon it by the inner areas of subjective life. Even the bare-seeming facts of history are experienced far differently according to the symbolic content within which they are inevitably immersed. A war, in your terms, can be practically experienced as a murderous disaster, a triumph of savagery, or as a sublime victory of the human spirit over evil. We will return to the subject of war later on. I want to mention here, however, that man is not basically endowed with warlike characteristics. He does not naturally murder. He does not naturally seek to destroy his own life or the lives of others. There is no battle for survival, but while you project such an idea upon natural reality, then you will read nature and your own experiences with it in that fashion. Man does have an instinct and a desire to live, and he has an instinct and a desire to die. The same applies to other creatures. In his life, each man is embarked upon a cooperative venture with his own species and with the other species, and dying, he also in that regard acts in a cooperative manner, returning his physical substance to the earth. Physically speaking, man's purpose is to help enrich the quality of existence in all of its dimensions. Spiritually speaking, his purpose is to understand the qualities of love and creativity, to intellectually and psychically understand the sources of his being, and to lovingly create other dimensions of reality of which he is presently unaware. In his thinking, in the quality of his thoughts, in their motion, he is indeed experimenting with a unique and a new kind of reality, forming other subjective worlds, which will in their turn grow into consciousness and song, which will in their turn flower from a dream dimension into other ones. Man is learning to create new worlds. In order to do so, he has taken on many challenges. You all have physical parents. Some of you have physical children as well, but you will all one day also be the mental parents of dream children who also waken in a new world and look about them for the first time, feeling isolated and frightened and triumphant all at once. All worlds have an inner being. All of your dreams somewhere waken, but when they do, they waken with the desire for creativity themselves, and they are born of an innocent new intent. That which is in harmony with the universe, with all that is, has a natural inborn impetus that will dissolve all impediments. It is easier, therefore, for nature to flourish than not. You are aware of such activities now as automatically speaking and automatic writing, and of sleepwalking. These all give signs in modern times of some very important evidence in man's early relationship with the world and with himself. Sleepwalking was once, in that beginning, a very common experience, far more so than now, in which the inner self actually taught the physical body to walk, and hence prevented the newly emerged physically oriented intellect from getting in its own way, asking too many questions that might otherwise impede the body's smooth, spontaneous motion. In the same fashion, man is born with an inbuilt propensity for language and for the communication of symbols through pictures and writing. He spoke first in an automatic fashion that began in his dreams. In a fashion you could almost say that he used language before he consciously understood it. It is not just that he learned by doing, but that the doing did the teaching. Again, lest there be a sharply inquiring intellect wondering overmuch about how the words were formed or what motions were necessary, his drawing was in the same way automatic. You might almost say, that he used the language despite himself. Therefore, it possessed an almost magical quality, and the Word was seen as coming directly from God. Okay, I'm going to stop right here. This is a really long chapter. Go to the next video labeled Part 2, The Garden of Eden, Chapter 5. Thank you for watching.